Welcome to the Hollywood and Toto podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
This week on the Hollywood and Toto podcast, we break down the dirty little secrets of film journalism. We speak with author and Ace of Spades contributor David Vining about the big-time directors debuting new films later this year. And we talk with Mike Binder about collaborating with Kevin Costner, building a woke-free comedy hub, and his thoughts on comedians trying to cancel fellow comedians. Oh my. Working in entertainment journalism gives me a good hard look at how the sausage is made, and it ain't pretty. Recently, I had a freelance story that was spiked, even though there was nothing really wrong with the story. No incorrect information, but the subject matter was, I guess, problematic. Later, maybe a day later or so, I spiked an article on my own website, Hollywood and Toto, for professional reasons. I'm not proud of that, but I think I made the right call. Sometimes the blowback is just not worth it, and I am not at the level where I can just go willy-nilly and do whatever I want on the site. I had to make a certain hard call here. You know, I also have to wrestle with writing stories that I think are really important right now to the culture, and of course the stories that we choose here as well, and then writing other stories that maybe are going to get more clicks and therefore more revenue and keep my little business afloat. I love promoting lesser-known artists, especially from the right. They don't get any love elsewhere, both, of course, here and at HollywoodandToto.com. But I also know those stories won't get a lot of traction, at least not like the umpteenth Bud Light update. That gets plenty and plenty of clicks and updates. I get it. You know, I'm proud of what I built here, both the podcast and my website, Hollywood and Toto, but there's so much more work to be done, and I've got to tread carefully sometimes. And in case you haven't noticed, there's a cancel culture movement out there. Could get you in trouble. Now, journalism in the digital age is not for the faint of heart. There's a dance going on here between telling the truth and, of course, making ends meet. It applies to me. It applies to major websites. It is complicated. But the good thing is there's stuff we can all agree on as being just absolutely horrible. Beware of headlines that egregiously use words like stuns or jaw-dropping. Sometimes you get both in one headline, which I love the best. Consider this one I just read. Heidi Klum stuns in a jaw-dropping yellow bikini in new vacation photos. Stop the presses. And yeah, I did click on that one. I'm sorry. I fell for it. But, you know, mainstream media's corruption is off the charts, and that's away from the entertainment realm. It's literally off the charts. If you look at the chart, you can see the corruption 4 or 5 feet off the chart. It's that bad. And, of course, that happens in entertainment journalism, too. And I want to mention one quick story. And I don't even know the full answer here, but I think it's worth mentioning. I read a story about Ricky Gervais. He was beefing up security for his current tour because of the challenging jokes he tells. Now, I was about to cover that and explore what other comedians are struggling right now with similar issues. But then I thought, well, is this story true? Multiple outlets ran with it, but they all sourced The Sun, which is a British paper which doesn't always have a perfect record when it comes to truth-telling. So I Googled the story to get some more information. I also learned that The Sun wrote a very similar story last year. Ricky Gervais beefs up security again. Is it true? False? I don't even know at this point. I don't think Gervais's camp confirmed anything there. Would they? I don't even know that. But that's where we are today, and why conspiracy theories are having an absolute field day. What a golden age. Of course, it doesn't help that the government and big tech are colluding to keep the truth at arm's length. Yesterday's conspiracy theories, today's hard news. Have you heard about COVID? What does it all mean? Well, just take care in choosing which news sources you read. Be skeptical, always. Demand transparency. If you don't get transparency, be even more skeptical. And if I get in trouble, if I make something, if I share some incorrect information here, please let me know. I will correct the record here, on the website, or both. That's the way I want to go about it. If a news story promises a stunning, nay, jaw-dropping revelation, just know the piece in question may not deliver the goods. Well, it's summer, and summer movies are all about big-time effects and explosions, and even more big-time effects and even more explosions. You know the drill. I wouldn't have it any other way. It makes me feel like a kid again. Except some of our biggest directors are prepping new movies that are coming out in the next few months, and they're going to give audiences something to savor beyond those explosions and cool special effects. David Vining is a film scribe, he's an author, and he's also a contributor to the bare-knuckled splendor that is Ace of Spades. Now, if you don't read that website, you should. I read it daily. Whenever I go to lunch, that's the first site I look at. It's a breath of fresh air. It's pugnacious in all the right ways. It's angry at times, funny for sure, but Ace of Spades, man, it is one of a kind. But David from Ace of Spades, he's a contributor there, like I said, he's here to fill us in on why movies like Oppenheimer, coming very soon, could change everything about the summer movie season and certainly give us the best counter-programming possible. Here's my chat with David Vining. David, summer's here. That means big, dumb, loud blockbusters, and I am not judging because I like those movies too. But we're also seeing some films from our best directors. Can you share a little bit more about what's coming our way soon?
Sure. I'm not opposed to big, dumb action movies either, but they tend to be corporate product, and, corporate product has its place, but cinema is an art form as well. And, we have a bunch of breathing directors who are making quality work. I think the obvious one to start with is Christopher Nolan and Oppenheimer. Christopher Nolan has become kind of the film bro god, but that doesn't deny me the fact that I really like him as well. And, him somehow managing to cobble together $100 million from a major studio to make a movie about the guy who headed the Manhattan Project. That's just fascinating stuff.
That's a great point, by the way. Let's not overlook that, because Hollywood is so risk averse, so unwilling to tell historical stories, especially if they cost a lot of money. And with Nolan, it's like, hey, just open up the pocketbook, the wallet, we'll give you whatever you want. So that's great. But
Nolan, I think Nolan and Tarantino are the only two superstar directors who can kind of attract audiences only by their name. And so Nolan understands that. And so he used, the Dark Knight trilogy to kind of build up his cachet. And then even in the middle of that, he was making stuff like The Prestige and Inception and Interstellar. And, he's just rocketed to this position in the culture where his name means something to mass audiences. It's not just, people who love movies. It's just mass audiences hear his name and be like, he makes the kinds of movies that I like to see. And so extending that to something like Dunkirk, which was surprisingly successful financially, and then moving it even further into something like Oppenheimer is just really exciting. He's making serious-minded films at a huge scale, and he's able to make the money back. And I really appreciate him for that.
What is it about Oppenheimer that intrigues you the most? What element of it? I mean, there's a lot there. Obviously, a great cast, an interesting subject. It's fascinating. I think he's even talked about how he used some more practical effects when creating some of these, like the explosions, which we're assuming will happen in that movie. But what's the big selling point here, you think, above and beyond his name?
For me, it's kind of the multifaceted approach he seems to be taking to the story, because I don't know if you've read, but the stuff you see in the film in color is supposed to be essentially from Oppenheimer's perspective himself. Mm-hmm. It's the run up to the bomb. And then everything in black and white is afterwards. And that's more third person kind of removed. And so, I'm getting, it's not just the different color approaches, but even just how he's kind of taking these two sides of the story, where the explosion of the Trinity test is kind of the center point. It reminds me of Memento, which is hard to say. It's underappreciated. Everyone loves it, but it's like it's that sort of play, intellectual puzzle blocks play that he's really good at, and people latch onto, but put into this really fascinating historical context.
Yeah.
I think that's what's interesting me most.
I think he pushed the puzzle piece formula too far in Tenet. That's my point of view. And obviously that came out during the height of the pandemic. Right. So it was multiple forces against it. But let's shift to another filmmaker who has new work coming soon, because I think there's one more big name. And again, another case where everything this person does is of interest, is an event, is noteworthy, even if it doesn't, it doesn't hit a home run every time, but this director just is the top of the top.
I mean, obviously you're thinking of Paul Schrader, right?
Of course, of course.
Well, I have a few in mind to talk about, but
Sure.
I did want to just mention Paul Schrader real quickly.
Absolutely.
I mean, he's not, he's part of that generation with like Scorsese. He wrote Taxi Driver, and he's become an accomplished director himself. He's not at that level, but his last few years has seen some kind of master revival, starting with First Reformed, really small, tight thriller, and it's great. But he has a new movie coming out called Master Gardener. I think it's in limited release now, which looks really interesting. It stars Joel Edgerton as a former undercover informant police officer who has left the violent world behind to just learn gardening, and he has this like father-daughter relationship with an errant youth, and who's of a different race too. But I just wanted to mention him.
Sure. Well, there's two things there. One is the fact that there are still artists out there creating on their own terms, bringing about big enough stars to make their films worthwhile from an economic point of view, and that matters as well. We desperately need counter programming this time of the year because, like you and I, enjoy those big dumb movies, but also we do want to change a pace, and I think that's important. And he does fly under the radar, that's for sure. But I know he's gotten some great reviews. I didn't enjoy, and I need to rewatch First Reformed because I don't think I enjoyed it as much as many of my peers. But also, you mentioned the good and bad reviews. That's actually the thing that intrigues me the most. When a movie gets a split reaction, I often am more intrigued, I'm more gravitated toward it because there's something about it that's pushing some buttons. And I think that's often the most engaging art that you can possibly have.
And Schrader, he's a guy who pushes buttons. Yeah. So it's definitely, he's always someone to pay attention to.
Yeah, he's maybe a character offline too. He does a lot of social media stuff, which sometimes I agree with him, sometimes I don't, but he is a unfiltered voice, and I applaud that.
His producer, his distributor asked him to stop doing social media during the lead up to the release of Master Gardener, and he agreed.
I'm surprised by that, but
But I have a feeling the other director you were referencing was Scorsese. Scorsese, it's not coming out this summer. It's got that Apple TV Plus release schedule, but it's coming out in October. It's Killers of the Flower Moon, based on a nonfiction book starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro. I put Scorsese kind of on a level that I'd put very, very few other directors. He's just the master who has gotten better with the years. Mm-hmm. Hugo and Shutter Island, I think Hugo, Shutter Island, and Silence, I think are better than things like Goodfellas, Casino, Raging Bull. And he's getting so much money now to make his movies that he doesn't, it's amazing that he does not get lost in the money like some of his other peers who were suddenly hit with 9-digit budgets. He still has that fierce eye on everything that makes a movie a movie. And so, it kind of doesn't matter what he would make. I'm always extremely excited about what he's going to make next. I was one of the 5 people who saw Silence in theaters. The reviews, it screened at Cannes out of competition, and the reviews were ecstatic.
I think you touched on a couple of things. One I want to talk about is age. Often with filmmakers, with artists, with any kind of talent, sometimes as the years progress, their skills diminish. And I don't know why. It's a fascinating subject, far beyond my scope, but it's certainly something we can observe. I mean, if you look at Brian De Palma, Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, these are all giants who in their later years have either stopped working or their work has been diminished dramatically. And yet some, I'd say Clint Eastwood, even though I didn't enjoy Cry Macho, are able to sustain what they do. And I think Scorsese is a perfect example. I remember watching The Wolf of Wall Street a couple of years ago, and this is when he's in his 70s, and it had such energy to it. You think, this must be a 20-something director who's just fresh in the scene. No, it's Scorsese. He still has that vision, that passion, and I love that about him. And yeah, I agree. He's one of
like George Miller directing Mad Max Fury Road.
Exactly.
It's like, this is the work of someone with so much energy, and you're a grandpa. And what I've observed through all of my watching is that the directors who are kind of heralded early for breaking rules, they end up just kind of like falling into a rut. I recently went through all of John Borman's work. You often hear, oh, I love John Borman's movies, but no one has seen anything he made after 1990. But the early stuff is very, very different from the later stuff, because the early stuff, it has this like scope and ambition that, you know, his later movies, even though some of them are actually, you know, fairly good, not great, but they're fairly good. They're accomplished, but they're not as exciting.
Yeah.
You know, you watch something like The General that brought Brendan Gleeson to the forefront with his performance as Martin Cahill. And, you know, it's a perfectly accomplished little crime movie. And then you compare that with something like Excalibur or something like Deliverance, which is almost a Sam Peckinpah movie in its approach to violence. And it's like, what happened to this guy? And it's just, I don't know, what the drive just kind of to break rules, to be different, just kind of died out. And what you're left with is their base skill at making cinema, and it's pretty good.
Yeah, it actually reminds me, maybe this is a bad comparison, of Howard Stern, who had this incredible fire in his belly as a younger man, and he was an innovator. And you love him, you hate him. A lot of people hate him, but he had this intensity, this passion. And now it's just he's just going through the motions. And I'm sure, like you said, the skill is of a certain level where he's never a bad broadcaster. He can conduct a very powerful interview. He knows how to keep people listening. But that energy is no longer there, and I think that's often, but not always, something youth-based where a younger person just has it. But before I let you go, I want to talk about your book, but I also want to say, listen, we talk about Spielberg and Scorsese and the giants, and they are acknowledged, and God bless the fact that they're still alive. But time moves on; they will retire. Some will pass away, obviously, sooner than later. Are there any newer faces, directors who maybe don't have the body of work yet, but their initial films suggest that we'll be talking about them for years, if not decades?
It's hard to judge younger filmmakers because, you know, you always have the one who has a couple promising things and then they fall off. But I have a handful that I keep keeping my eye on. The first is David Lowery. Now, his most recent release was that Wendy and Peter Pan thing, which I have not watched yet, but I hear is terrible. So little caveat there. But he's obviously doing this thing where he's balancing corporate work with Disney with more personal work. And so the more personal work is stuff like A Ghost Story, which was that movie with Casey Affleck in a white sheet.
Yeah, it's a very interesting movie. It takes a lot of patience, but it's pretty powerful.
That movie's beautiful. And then The Green Knight, which is a very challenging take on the anonymous poem. And it's really, really interesting to dig into. So yeah, he's doing corporate work that may not be great, but he's also managing to find the funds for something unique. The next would be Robert Eggers. I wasn't the biggest fan of The Norseman. I felt like it just kind of sagged too much in the middle, but there's no doubting that The Norseman, The Lighthouse, and The Witch are all very interesting films.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
So
even if I have flaws with each of them, there's a vision there. There's someone behind the camera who really is worth your attention.
There really is a vision. He's got something to say. Ari Aster, kind of in that same vein. I haven't seen Beau is Afraid, but I like Hereditary. I like what did he make after that?
Midsommar.
Oh yeah, Midsommar. Yeah, I liked Midsommar. My wife hated it. She hates that I made her sit through it.
I'm with your wife on that one, but I agree. He is an interesting filmmaker. He piques my curiosity now, and I think he may get much better too.
And then finally is the Safdie brothers. You know, Uncut Gems and the first one. They apparently are splitting up professionally to make their own projects, but there's like this uncomfortable, like aggressive energy to their films. Good Times, that's what it's called.
Yeah.
That I really appreciate. I don't know if they can maintain it over the course of the decades. I don't know if they can maintain interest by just being like aggressively antagonistic to their audience, but it's something that I'm interested to see develop.
Sure. Well, I'm going to switch gears so dramatically, we might have to, the car may roll over, but you're also an author in addition to a commentator. Your book is called Colonial Nightmare, and it looks at a part of the George Washington story that I think many people aren't aware of. Can you give us a little peek into that and why it's so special?
Sure. So it's centered around a real event in George Washington's life when he was 21 years old. He was a major in the colonial militia for Virginia. It was a rank he inherited from his brother who died like a year before. And he took a message from the colonial governor of Virginia up to a French army base in northwestern Pennsylvania called Fort Le Boeuf. And then he came back. And on his way back, he was almost killed by an Indian that he and his guide encountered. The Indian fired 2 guns. They both misfired, and Washington survived. I read this in a biography of Washington, and I was blown away. How have I never heard about this? And the idea kind of kept with me for a while. And I eventually realized I haven't heard of it because the truth has been suppressed. George Washington didn't encounter an Indian. He encountered some kind of mysterious creature of otherworldly powers. And I have written the true story of what happened.
Interesting.
And so it's a fight on 3 different levels. He has to fight the beating down of nature in the middle of winter as he makes this hundreds of miles journey on foot. He has the French and Indian War, because if he fails, the 7 Years' War between France and England could suddenly explode and reach American shores. And on top of that, he has this monster stalking him through the forests. So it's a horror book. It's an alternative history book. It's all about just kind of putting you in the shoes of Washington in this harrowing event. There's obvious inspiration with Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, but this is something unique. I feel like it's something kind of terrifying, and I think it's something kind of special.
Yeah, and also it brings attention to an earlier chapter of his life in a very unique way. And I'd say it's perfectly made for a movie, but I think Hollywood wouldn't want to do something so original and clever. They prefer to reboot things. That's sort of their go-to mode. So we can leave it as in book form, and that's, I'm sure, good enough. But
I don't know if any agents want to call me.
That's right.
Just let me know.
If they beg to differ with me. But you can pick up that book, Colonial Nightmare, at Amazon or your favorite bookseller. You could also check out David's work at Ace of Spades. And I have to say, I read Ace of Spades daily. It is a tonic. There are all sorts of sharp elbows from a political perspective, but boy, it is invigorating. So if you haven't seen Ace of Spades, do check that out. David, thank you so much, and I hope we can talk again on other subjects.
I just want to make it clear, I'm not Ace.
You're not Ace. You are part of the Ace team for sure.
I'm part of the Ace team.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk again.
All right. Thank you. Talk to you later.
Mike Binder gave up stand-up comedy for a career in Hollywood, making movies and TV shows, and things worked out pretty well for him, I have to say. Not only did he find steady work, but he wrote and directed some really good films. Think about The Upside of Anger with Kevin Costner, Joan Allen. Reign Over Me with Adam Sandler and Don Cheadle. Again, another good one. Need another? Black and White with Kevin Costner again. That's a movie you could not make today as is, and he's going to get into that a little bit. Now, Mike is not doing movies at this moment, though. He's actually gone back to his stand-up roots. He's not only performing in clubs, but he's in charge of a website that gathers the very best of stand-up comedy today, all in one place. The website? standupworld.com. And you'll see comedy news, podcast links, YouTube information, so much more. If you love comedy, this is your new favorite destination. Trust me. Now, Mike has plenty to say on comedy, of course, from fellow comedians trying to attack him for promoting other comedians, to why Kevin Costner was a force of nature on a film set and how he drew a line in the sand and defended his art. You want to censor him? Good luck trying. It's a great story. Of course, we need more artists like Kevin Costner, who's one of a kind, but we also need more storytellers and joke tellers like Mike Binder. Mike, thank you for joining the show. I wanted to start with The Tonight Show. You were one of the younger comedians who ever graced that stage. I was curious, all these years later, what do you take away from that experience? And are there any platforms today that can do what Johnny and Jay did to make a career just by that distinctive performance? It just seems so life-changing sometimes. Is there anything similar to that? So it's kind of a two-part question.
Well, I just, when I did this documentary for Showtime about the Comedy Store, this 5-part documentary, and we did this whole long piece about the Tonight Show, and so many comedians talked about how it changed their lives, and it really did. I remember, the first time I did it, it just, how nervous I was, and how badly I wanted to be on the Tonight Show, and everybody had jokes about the Tonight Show, and it was just, everything was geared, our lives geared towards, that's what it was. You geared yourself towards that first Tonight Show shot.
That was the moment.
And today it's completely different. I mean, I don't think those talk shows mean anything to a comedian's trajectory today. And they really don't. They don't help. They don't hurt. I think the closest thing to it today is getting on Joe Rogan. I think Joe Rogan, a really good appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast can change your entire career. And I think he is the one true star maker out there right now. But I feel like the world is completely different. I did stand up from the time I was 17 to the time I was 30. And then I stopped doing it. And I started up again last June. And I'm doing it now again, kind of back at the beginning, running again and watching how you start and what you do and what the world is. And it's a completely different world. You work out your sets, you record it as much as you can, you make little reels out of it, and you put it up on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, and you build a following to sell club dates, and you hope that some of them will go viral on TikTok or whatever. And then the trajectory there is you do a special. Most guys just make their own special, most comics, stand-ups, and then cut that special into many, many little clips. And again, with the idea of building a following and selling more tickets.
Yeah.
And it's just, and then another special. And, even a couple of years ago, it was just all about getting a Netflix special. And it's not even that anymore. I mean, Netflix now, they pay new comics much less, and they give them the special back after a year.
Do you think that it might be more the way of the future, where I know that Andrew Schultz and Louis C.K. have gone rogue? They do it themselves. Is that where we're headed, where the comedian has all the power?
We're not headed. We're there.
Okay. And you see it as a positive, I would imagine. You've got more control, you've got more say and more sway, and if it's successful, you reap the benefits.
Absolutely. There's no gatekeeper. There's no middleman. There's no executives. I'm in the process right now. I'm working on a thing. I have a site called standupworld.com, and I'm working on building an app with some really talented people that we want to make it the Spotify of stand-up comedy, and that the comedians own a big part of it and put up their stuff non-exclusively, like Spotify and iTunes. And, there's all these specials being made. There's no really great way to monetize it. There is the moment.co, and Louis C.K. can do it on his special, but there's no place to monetize it. So we're trying to put together a plan that everybody can put up all their specials on one app, one platform, and everybody goes there and watches it a little higher quality and a little more focused than YouTube, and can watch it on their televisions and on their Rokus and their Apple TVs, and listen to it in their cars and on their iPads and their computers. but everything's together in one place.
Mm-hmm.
And all the boats rise up, and also they can use it to, if you like this guy, you'll like this guy, and if you like this guy, here's his tours announced here, and you can get his tickets for his tours through here, and
Well, that's a great idea. I think
so-
the recommendation part of that alone would be worthwhile, because people,
Yes.
if I like Jim Gaffigan, it means maybe I like clean comedy or family centered. Maybe that's
Yes.
my particular interest. But you took like a really long
or
break.
guys with beards.
That's right, exactly. People like Pot Pockets. You took a big break from comedy, and now you're back. I was kind of curious. You're older, you're wiser. You've had so much experience in between then. How do you think you maybe evolved as a comedian? Do you find yourself as your toolkit is more expansive? You're able to do things you couldn't do before. I'm kind of curious how you think you've changed and improved over the years.
Well, I am a better comic for some reason. I
Mhm.
don't know why, but I am. Well, I do know. I understand it as a craft a little bit more. I understand it that I have to work a little harder at it.
Mhm.
When I was a kid, I was a bit of a party animal, but I also look at it more as a director, maybe, and as a screenwriter also, well, okay, this bit works, but it doesn't quite work. Don't throw it out. How
Mhm.
can we fix it? How can I fix it? What does it need? What's missing? Maybe I'm getting into it wrong. Maybe I'm getting out of it too fast.
Yeah. So all those years in the
okay.
movie trenches, it's a good skill set they're going to bring into this.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah, and sometimes I've realized, boy, I have a area that's working really well, and I add a couple jokes before it that are making the bit after it not work as well. So I have to dump those.
Yeah.
Now,
obviously,
like having a scene, but like you find out in a movie that a scene before a sequence hurts the sequence.
I would imagine or I think it's fair to say you're cut from the old comedy school cloth, where it's comedy. You can do what you want to do, say what you want to say. We don't live in those times right now. Two questions. One, do you think we'll go back there? And two, the people who argue that the change is necessary, do they have some valid points about that?
Sometimes, I think on a surface level they do. I don't think just mean comedy is good. I don't think, although it never was, I think look at someone said, well, there'll never be another Don Rickles. Don Rickles wasn't mean. Don Rickles poked fun at people, and people used to have a sense of humor about each other, and I don't think we're ever going to go back to people being able to just poke, just be malicious. But I don't think people ever really were.
Yeah, I think if you went to a Don Rickles show and he didn't pick on you, you felt upset. You want to be kind of part of the fun.
Don Rickles was not mean, and he wasn't malicious. I personally feel like people need to lighten up. Myself, and hopefully they will. You gotta be able to laugh at the world. You gotta be able, and as far as I just wrote a piece about this on Stand Up World. What's the definition of being brave as a comedian right now? Comedians are supposed to be counterculture. They're supposed to say what you're not allowed to hear, what you're not allowed to talk about. Jim Brewer, back in 21, just a couple of years ago, did this beautiful special called Somebody Has to Say It about the vaccine, and it was hysterical. And I wrote about it on my site, and some of my comedian friends just called me and lambasted me. How dare you? What are you doing? What are you spreading? What are you lifting this guy up for? He's a moron and he's spreading disinformation. And I was like, well, I don't know, man. He's funny. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
And and I think, people are getting too, whenever Bill Maher bites a little bit of a red pill and goes off the the plantation lane or whatever you're supposed to call it, and people just jump all over him. I think, especially if he's doing his act or if he's doing his show, he should be able to find funny anywhere. And I try that now that I'm back being a comedian. I don't like to censor myself in any way. My wife and kids are always, oh, you're going to get in trouble saying this or get in trouble saying that. I don't really worry about it too much.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Is there one topic that's radioactive at this point that you found either through your work or other people in the industry where you go with this topic? Be careful, strap in. You're in for a bumpy ride.
If there was, I would lean into it.
Okay.
I wouldn't be afraid of it. I just did a joke on my podcast this morning about Elliot Page. I was saying, Elliot Page has a book out, and he's talking about he had sex with Kate Mara and Olivia Thirlby, and I said, well, the transition's complete if he's talking about all these chicks he's fucked. He's a guy now.
Which is funny. You mentioned on your recent podcast, you said your daughter's getting married and she's a lesbian, and you were wondering about who pays for the wedding, because usually that's the whole ritual, the father of the bride or whatever. And I thought, right. Well, that's coming from a place of warmth, but it's an observation that people are curious about. So that's interesting. I was literally going to ask you my next question. I've talked to other comedians, and they say a lot of the fire that they get, the blowback, is from fellow comics, and you're confirming that. But I guess my question is why? I mean, if you're a comedian, you think you'd have the most sympathy and the most allegiance to your peers, but that's not the case. Why?
That's what I think. But a lot of these guys are morons.
Okay.
And they're just so, I don't know what they're afraid of, or their wives, or I don't know. I don't understand it myself.
Yeah.
But I also find they're the least read, the least informed,
Mm-hmm.
They're just like, I follow the science. Well, what science?
Yeah.
What have you been reading? Oh, I'm not reading anything. I just listen to people that know what they're talking about. Who? Know who? Know who? But I just, to me in general, I don't, listen, we've been lied to so much by so long, that I just want to make fun of it and laugh with it and have a good time. And it's not all I want to do in my comedy, but I definitely, if there's a hot button issue, I want to go after it. I mean, I love, when, to me, comedy's the best when you go after it. I love Chappelle, man. He went after the transgender thing. Everyone said, well, look at how much trouble he got into. I said, well, he ended up with four more specials, and Netflix told the people that work for them that were upset about it, maybe they should find another place to work,
Yeah.
So he didn't get in that much trouble.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just got to stand up for yourself. Now,
that was a pivotal stand, by the way. I think it could have gone either way.
What'd you say?
I said that was a pivotal stand that Netflix stood up for him, because I thought it would go the opposite direction.
Randos for doing that, you know, and listen, it's one thing about when someone misbehaves off stage, but when someone's on stage, I do this joke. I say, my kids are so woke. My son, I can't bring him into a comedy club because he just burst into flames. It's like taking a werewolf to a beach, But if you're that person, you shouldn't come to a club. You shouldn't watch a special. You shouldn't turn it off. But why tell other people they can't laugh at this stuff? And mean, going back to what you're saying about, people making their own specials and putting them on YouTube or other sites, there shouldn't be any kind of censoring of comedy. You know, comics should not be censoring themselves or other comics for sure.
Yeah. I was going to.
It's an important art form, and it's important release, especially in these times when people are afraid to have opinions anymore. People are afraid to talk out against the government because they'll be canceled, or at work they'll be canceled, or they're afraid to say what they really feel about issues. And there should be some area, and I believe comedy's one of
Mhm.
most important, where if you want to be the guy that or the woman that signs up and gets up and grabs the microphone and finds at least what you think is funny about these issues, nobody should be able to tell you where the tilt button is,
Yeah.
other than the crowd laughing or not laughing.
And if the crowd doesn't show up, I think you've missed the mark, and that's the ultimate arbiter of the situation.
Right.
Obviously, you're not just a comedian. You've done some really great films. The Upside of Anger, Black and White was terrific. I was curious, are you interested in going back into that writer-director role again, or do you find yourself more the comedy is your North Star at this point?
I don't know. I don't have a lot of interest in it right this moment.
Mhm.
I just produced a movie for my son, and I want to produce another movie for him because he's a really good writer director.
What's the name of it so we can let people know about it?
It's called Halfway to Amarillo. It just won Best Independent Film at the LA Film Festival.
Excellent.
And and I wrote a movie for Adam Sandler that I'd like to do one day, but I'm really not. No, I don't feel super excited about that part of my life. I
Mhm.
really feel excited about stand-up comedy and the stand-up world that I'm developing in this platform that I want to do. And I really feel that I want to be, an important in the I hate to use the word warrior, but a soldier in the
Yeah.
free speech movement that
Gotcha.
this country really needs right now.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more there. I've had the fortune to interview a lot of big stars over the years, and as a movie fan, it's been enjoyable for me. But by far, my favorite actor I've met was Kevin Costner. He was so smart, so engaged, and obviously, you brought out the best in him in 2 films. I was kind of curious your reaction to his Yellowstone resurgence. It seems like every couple of years there's a new project that makes him a superstar again. But you've worked with him intimately. What did you see as the secret sauce with Kevin, or why you work so well together?
Well, I've just been lucky to work with him. He's bigger than life. He's a force of nature. He's like Adam Sandler. They're just so talented, and I believe, stars of that level, and they're very, very few.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Tom Cruise at this point, Kevin Costner, Adam Sandler. But the audience sees through the camera to see what kind of person they are and
Mm-hmm.
how great they are, their greatness, and Kevin has that. He's bigger than life, and he's just a wonderful person. I've seen it. He's is he perfect? No, but I've seen him be just an incredible human being
Mm-hmm.
many, many, many times, to people, to me, to his family, and he has a lot on his shoulders, and he takes a lot on, and I think he's such an icon, and I think that Yellowstone kind of brought him, showed that version of him to the world, and they kind of like that. But that's kind of who he is, when I was working with him a couple times, man, he just decided, no, we're not going to do it that way. No, and the studio or some group of people would say, well, that's wrong, Kevin. We got to do it. You'd say, nah, I'm going to go back in the trailer and we'll figure it out. You know, and he knew where true north was, and they were right.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, those instincts
You
are
know,
hard to duplicate.
And a couple times, you know, we just would have, you know, just like things that the character needed, and he'd just stand firm, you know, and especially Black or White, which was a really tough one. You know, Kevin and I started out on that movie, and it was really about something, you know, and then in the middle of it, Ferguson and all this stuff happened, but before all that, we were showing it to black audiences and white but black audiences loved that movie, and it came out, and especially white critics, you know, like just hated it, you know, and you know, he just said, well, they're wrong, you know, and he put his own money up, and he just stayed true to that movie, you know, and you know, like, and there was a scene that I had written where his character gets in a fight with the character of who played the little girl's father, who's just really badly behaved his whole life. He's been on drugs, and he's been, you know, and he calls him the street N-word, you know. And the day we shot that was the day that Paula Dean got into all that trouble.
Oh my gosh.
Years ago. And I said, we were shooting in Louisiana, and I said, are you going to shoot a cover of that? And he said, nope, because they'll use it, or someone will make me want to use it, and that you wrote it that way. You were right to write, because later he's got a whole courtroom scene where he talks about what that word and what he feels, and you know, and he said, no. And the producers, some of the other producers said, yeah, maybe you should cover it for yourself. And he went, I already said I wasn't going to cover it, you know, and he just doesn't doubt himself. And that's why he's bigger. That's why he's where he is, you know?
Well, I'm a white critic, and I disagree with my fellow white critics, and I think I'm glad he's took that stand, because I do think that matters, and it's the character, and it's storytelling, and it's evocative, and that's what we need. And I think that movie would have a greater struggle coming out today, sadly, but it's still well worth checking out. But Mike, before I let you go, I want to talk a little bit about standupworld.com. One stop for all your comedy needs. You got podcasts, you've got breaking news, you got all this, what are these different links and stories. But just given all the work that you do and the way you look at comedy right now, are there any comedians who are flying a little below the radar? Maybe they're not big stars yet. You know, we knew the Sebastian Maniscalcos of the world, obviously, but maybe someone who you think they could be the next big thing, or even if they're never the big thing, they're just a good comedian. Anyone you could recommend?
Yeah, there's a few. I mean, there's well, you know, there's this comedian, Brian Holtzman, who we just dropped a special on YouTube at the Comedy Store's site on YouTube. Bill Burr produced it with myself and Peter Shore, the owner of the Comedy Store. Then I directed it. But he's like a Comedy Store legend already. He's been there so long. And he's Joe Rogan's favorite comedian. And you could watch that special. It's called #Cancel Holtzman. He's out of his mind.
And if you say that, Mike, he's really pushing the boundaries. So I'm looking forward to that.
Pushing the boundaries. And also, there's another guy named Will Noonan who's just dropping it this Friday out of Boston. They have this. I don't know what's in the water at Boston. But they just drop these amazing comedians, and this guy's going to be huge.
Excellent.
But it's called 50 TikToks in a Row, and it's his name is Will Noonan. And then there's this woman, Catherine Blanford, and I think she's fantastic.
Excellent. Well, you could talk directly to Mike, and that's not always possible. He's a busy guy. Or you can drop by standupworld.com for all things stand-up comedy. Great resource for information just like that. You know, we all know about the big stars, but it's the rising ones you really have to work to get to know and appreciate them right now before Maybe they get too big and you can't even afford the
there's
contest.
one other guy.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
a guy named Vinny Fastline, where you can get him on Instagram. Vinny Fastline, FASLINE, who's really good.
Excellent.
And he's someone we write about on the site.
Excellent. Well, that site again is standupworld.com. Or if you need more, Mike, you can go to Stand Up World Podcast. He's got new episodes coming and, of course, great conversations about comedy, about free speech, about what's going on in that culture right now. Mike, thank you so much. I selfishly wish you'd make more movies because they were so good. But if you're making comedy, good enough for me. And I appreciate you taking the time to share your vision with us.
Thanks a lot for having me on and for all the work you do on your thing and your site and your blog. And I really appreciate it. Thanks for asking me.
All right, don't go yet. It's time for your weekly tip. Hang in there. You know, the movie To Leslie came and went last year from theaters. Really didn't make much of a ripple. Certainly didn't make a lot of money until something crazy happened. Star Andrea Riseborough snagged a Best Actress nomination from the movie out of left field. I mean, completely out of left field. And of course, what did Hollywood do? Did they celebrate this underdog story? No, they freaked out. That's not supposed to happen. This is Oscar season. There's a rhythm. There's a flow to it. We pick all the different artists who are going to be nominated. They all fight over the next few months, and then we pick the top 5 and we go from there. That's the system. They even launched an investigation to see if she broke any rules during her campaign, or maybe some of her famous friends who pushed her candidacy, if they did something untoward. Of course, you know, this is almost as dirty as a political season when it comes to Oscars. So you can Google the whole silly story for yourself. But the bottom line is that To Leslie is a very good film and is streaming right now on Netflix. That she plays Leslie. She, of course, is a blue-collar woman who won the lottery, and she blew it all away. Now she's broke and bouncing between one makeshift home to the next, and maybe even finding a little romance. Mark Maron is a co-star here. He's excellent. I am not a fan of his podcast. I'm not a fan of his comedy. Certainly not a fan of his attacks on free speech, but as an actor, he's pretty good. The movie itself is good as well. It's powerful. It's raw. It's one of those films that makes you cringe, but you also care about the characters in a really emotional way. Now, Riseborough is sensational here, and I think what works is that she could have went all in on this role and just been over the top and woe is me, but she keeps it on that edge where she is cringeworthy at times, but you can see the soul just trying to have a redemption story. It's a wonderful performance, and she earned that nomination for sure. And the bottom line is, To Leslie is a very good film, and it's worth a look right now on Netflix. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you to Radio America for having me as part of their podcast lineup. And please, if you like the show, tell a friend. Word of mouth may be old school, but man, it is a game changer when it kicks into high gear. See you next time.